So let's jump now into what is one of the biggest things if you think about observing, like what are you actually observing? So in as much detail as you can, Adam, with this, you've walked into the classroom. What are you doing there?
Okay, so a lot of people, when they observe, they sort of hang around at the back, they take some notes, they write down what the teacher's doing. I don't do that at all. Let's do a scenario. Yeah. So the most easiest and most obvious one. Teacher's doing some verbal questioning. They ask a student a question. The student gives an answer, but they're quite quiet. Okay. So the teacher steps towards the student and asks him to repeat it. The student repeats it. It's still quite quiet. I can't hear what they said. So one thing I could do is just write down, make the student speak up. And we'll then go into the feedback, and I say, they were very quiet. Couldn't hear them. You need to ask the student to speak up. The teacher will go, yeah, I'll do that. And then nothing will happen. The other route is what I try to do, which is I say, look, okay, so that child is quiet. I'm assuming that nobody else heard them either. So I'll go to a kid and at the back, and I'll just say, what did, they say they'd asked David, and David was one who's quiet. I say, what did David just say? And they say, I don't know, sir. And then I'll go back to the teacher and I say, are you happy with the fact that like 10 or so kids can't hear the conversation? And they're like, well, obviously not. Well, why not? Well, that's a third of my class that just aren't listening in a phase of the lesson. And I'm like, yeah, that really needs to change, doesn't it? They're like, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Now that's an obvious one, right? But there are sometimes more subtle ones. Let's say a teacher asks a kid a question. Yeah, the kid says, I don't know, sir, sorry. And they ask somebody else. So I go up to that kid and I say, what question were you asked? And they go, I actually don't know, sir. And I then go to the teacher and I say, when you asked that question, they said they didn't know. Why do you think they said they didn't know? And they'll say, well, because they didn't know. And I said, no, they weren't listening. Because I went to them and I asked them and I said, what were you asked? And they said, I didn't know. Now, what message do you think it sends to that child when you then just move on to the next student? And they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, yes, right? You're just telling that child it's okay to just completely not be listening in my lesson. I then, that's a kind of a basic level. It's about investigating the effect of a teacher action. So teacher does X. What's the effect on the students? And you can test that so easy just by asking. Yeah, and most of the time I'm just asking, what did he say? What did she say? What did the teacher say? Let's do another example. So teacher is delivering a check for understanding. They're using mini whiteboards. Everything's going well. They ask question 1, question 2, question 3. A lot of students make a mistake in question 3. Teacher notices, right? And does a reteach, re-explains question 3, and moves on to question 4. Now, there's a lot of stuff the teacher's doing well here, right? And I never, by the way, it might sound like I'm critical here, yeah, because everything I'm saying is like quite negative, but that's by definition what feedback is, about pushing someone forwards, right? But I would also say to that teacher, look, I do not want to take this for granted. First thing is, you did a check for understanding. In 90% of classrooms up and down the country, a check for understanding is not happening. Point 2, you used the mini whiteboards. Again, even where a check for understanding is happening, mini whiteboards aren't being used. Point 3, you noticed that a lot of students got something wrong, and you very cleanly and clearly, deliberately retaught it. The basics are in play. Yeah, this is stuff that I don't take for granted, that I don't see everywhere I go. Well done, keep it up. But let's examine. Okay, so move that aside. So what I do then in the class is I say, right, well, they've got question 1, 2, 3 correct, they've got 4 wrong. Teacher re-explained, moved on to 5. What did they not do after step 4? A recheck for understanding. Okay, so if a whole bunch of kids get something wrong, you can't just re-explain it and move on. You have to check it again. So what I do is I have my own mini whiteboards and I just write down the question 4 on my board. I wait 3 or 4 minutes. I go to a student. I say, what's the answer to this? Oh, don't know, sir. Or they get it wrong. And I say to the teacher, I really liked the reteach, but this is what happened. Yeah. And they're like, oh, God, but I retaught it. And I'm like, yes, but you didn't recheck for understanding. They're like, Now, for buy-in, gold dust. Gold dust. Because unless they say to you, no, I think you're lying, incontrovertible evidence. Yeah. Like, no one can look at that and think, right, everything's dandy.
Yeah.
Fine. No one can look at that and say that's great. You know, I take photos of kids' work.
Yeah, me too.
Like if I hear, I was in a lesson where the teacher gave instructions about the students were about to do a particular exercise, and she gave the instruction, told them to get on with it, and then reminded them and said, just by the way, remember to use X, Y, or Z, which is this success criteria they had. It was something in psychology, some success criteria or paragraph structure, whatever it was. And I'm like, okay, look, it's very obvious. Kids have started already by the time you said that. They're not going to hear you. They're not going to be listening. So I go round and I just have a look, right? And I'm like, have they done that? Have they done that? No. Take photo. And I show the photos and I say, look, let's say it was P or paragraph. It wasn't P or paragraph. I said, look, you wanted them to write in a P or paragraph, and you said that very clearly to them. She says, yes. So, well, look, did this child use a P or paragraph? No. Did this child use a P or paragraph? No. Did this child use a P or paragraph? No. Well, why is that? And she's like, well, I'm not really sure. I said, I'll tell you exactly why. It's because when you gave the instructions, you told them to use a P or paragraph once they'd already started.
Yeah.
So they're not listening to you. You gave your instructions. You said, this is the question I want you to ask. Do it in your exercise book, blah, blah, blah. Get on with it. Oh, and remember to make sure you use a P or paragraph. Right? But they've started already, so they're not listening. It's incontrovertible evidence. Nobody turns around and says, no, I don't agree. What do you mean you don't agree? Like, it's right in front of your face. Sometimes people do get defensive. Yeah. And that's where this like intensive evidence gathering process comes in, because you can have, this is spicy.
Yeah.
It's very, very much not easy to hear this kind of stuff, because we're used to hearing, oh, use cold call more often. Okay. We're not used to hearing 7 students did not do what you asked them to do. Yeah. You know, I observed a lesson this week. The teacher said, we mark in self-assessment purple pen. Teacher said, right, get your purple pens out. Let's get marking and then move on. And I noticed the teacher did not check whether or not the students had their purple pen. So I go around the room and I count the number of students who do not have a purple pen in their hands, and it's 8. They said, you've got a class of 30 students, 8 of them did not have a purple pen in their hands. You'd asked them to do it, but you didn't pause, you didn't check, you didn't hold them to account. Right? So 8 of them didn't do it. Incontrovertible, but it's difficult to hear. Right? Because it's not me saying, make sure that if they've just moved on or whatever, I say, you need just make sure you put a bit more of a pause. It's, no, what you tried to do failed. Yeah. You tried to do X, it didn't work. Yeah. The lesson was worse because of it. Right? Do you want students to reflect on their work in purple pen? Yes, I do. Do you think your lesson would have been better if they had done? Yes. Well, your lesson was worse because they didn't. Because you didn't do this very, very specific, very precise thing. Your lesson was worse. It's very difficult to hear that. Very difficult, because we're not used to receiving feedback like that. A, the level of precision, and B, the level of, it feels personal, right? Because it's about something that I did or didn't do. And it can be very hard to hear. So I always explain to people that the feedback is going to be of that nature, right? And it will be challenging. And I talk to people about how I was challenged by my boss when I started, and I found it really difficult to hear. And I was like, it's like really defensive, and then you slowly move that part of yourself to the side, that ego that says, I don't want to hear this, and you just accept, and you're like, it's not easy, but God, you're fucking right, aren't you? And you're like, yeah. And I'm not having a go at you. I'm not telling you off, right? I'm not asking you to beat yourself up or flagellate or whatever. I'm just saying that because of X, Y happened. X is an easy fix. Yeah. I'm not asking for you. Basically, to this date, I've never asked anyone to do any additional work outside of a lesson. I've never had to, right? Because there's enough stuff that they can change in the lesson that will make a big enough impact. I don't need to get to that stuff. Yeah, I mean, sometimes there are curriculum problems which you deal with the head of the department, whatever. But by and large, with the individual teacher, 9 times out of 10, the things I'm spotting are things they can just change within the lesson. Small reordering. Yeah. If a teacher doesn't front load their means of participation, so they say, okay, guys, get your mini whiteboards out without talking. The students start talking. Okay. Why? Because they hear the bit about getting your mini whiteboards out. They start getting the mini whiteboards out. They don't hear the bit about not talking. So I say, look, just swap it around. Just say, without talking, get your mini whiteboards out. Like, am I asking for additional work, right? Am I infringing on your 1,265 hours or whatever? No, I'm not, right? Just a little shift, and it would have helped. It wouldn't have helped. It's not going to revolutionise your world, but it's going to make a 5% difference here, a 10% difference there, and that's worth doing.
Can I give you a couple here, Adam, of ones that I've done recently, just to reflect on?
Be my guest, Greg.
And also, just to see if my process was the same as yours. And I'm pretty sure it is, because I think I've nicked it straight from your blog here. So we'll see. So I'll go into a room, and the first thing I'll do, I'll just spend the first few minutes just trying to get a general sense of what's going on. I normally take a photo of the board straight away, just from the back of the room, just so I can kind of put it in a bit of context of where we're at in the lesson, so I can refer back to later. And I'll spend the next few minutes just watching the teacher, watching the kids, just getting a sense of what's going on, and then I'll form this hypothesis. And again, I'm pretty sure I've got this from you. So
the hypothesis model.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples of this, and then I'll follow, and then I definitely got this from you. Based on the hypothesis, I'll try and get this critical evidence, because without the evidence, you're screwed. Because in that conversation afterwards, you don't have that objectivity, and it becomes a bit vague, and it becomes a bit pace, engagement, blah, 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 as we've talked about. So I'll give you two kind of concrete examples from the last couple of weeks that have been, one was received well, one wasn't received all that well. So the first was, this last week, I was watching this guy teach both maths lessons, and we'll talk about, by the way, non-subject specialist observations a little bit later on. So I was watching this guy teach, second in department, really good teacher, and he said to the kids, right, I'm going to show you how to do this on the board, and it was volume of a cylinder. And my hypothesis was the kids won't know whether they should be just watching him do this model, or whether they should be watching and trying to write things down at the same time. And it's going to lead to...
Because he hadn't said what he wanted them to do. Yeah.
So I thought, right, that's my hypothesis. What's going to be my evidence? So what I did is I took a picture of him at the board, kind of turned to the board with his pen in his hands. And then I always kind of get permission off the school and stuff, I took some pictures, kind of wide shots of the classroom of what the kids were doing. And lo and behold, about 50% were looking up, 50% weren't off task. They were trying to follow, but they had their, heads down, pens down as they're trying to write. Whilst he's at the board, he's gesturing to key points, and the kids are missing this left, right, and centre because their heads are down. So in our feedback meeting afterwards, I thought I'd kind of do a bit of a big reveal on this, because I get on quite well with this guy. I thought he'd be able to take it. So I said, right, I'm going to show you a picture of a key point in this lesson when you're doing the modelling. So I showed him the picture of him modelling. And I said, what do you reckon your kids were doing at this moment in time? And he said, well, they were watching me because I was modelling. And I said, okay, let's have a look at these pictures. And I try not to be smug about it because you don't want to come across as a dick, right? And I said, okay, let me just show you these pictures. And he couldn't believe it, right? But there, and it was, as you say, it was this key moment. That was the turning point for him in this conversation, because there was that critical evidence. And if I'd have just said to him, you know what, I don't think some of your kids were fully following your modelling there because they weren't watching, he'd have been like, well, I'm not so sure about that. But here's the kind of photo evidence. So I find the photos really powerful, and that led to a really positive conversation. And as you say, a really tiny change that he can make there, right? Just saying, before I do this model, empty your hands. Your job is to watch me and do nothing out, and, all those kind of things. So that was a kind of really positive one. I'll give you another example. So this was another school, and it was the do now. It was the start of the lesson, and there were questions on the board. It was another maths lesson, and the teacher said to the kids, just crack on with your do now, do it in your books. And whilst the kids were doing this, the teacher was at the front of the classroom, kind of doing the register, a bit of admin stuff, all this kind of thing. So my hypothesis there was some of these kids, to use your phrase, are doing the classic busy tricking, right? They've got the pen in the hand, but they're not doing anything, right? Because they're
writing titles, they're underlining things. Yeah.
Because they know what's going to happen in 5 minutes' time is the teacher's just going to go through it on the board, and they can just copy it down there and then. And everyone thinks that everyone's happy with that. The kids have had to do nothing, but the teacher's happy because they've got things in their book and blah, blah, blah. So that was my hypothesis. So I thought I'd get some evidence on this. So I just went around the room. And I was very polite about it to the kids. I just said, do you mind if I just take a quick picture of your book? And I time-stamped each one and so on and so forth. And then in the conversation afterwards, I said, what do you think your kids were doing whilst the do now was on the board? And he's like, well, they were doing the do now. And I said, well, here's, 5 kids. And, one of them's just started question 1. Another one's writing the date down, the title down, and so on. And again, it was that real critical evidence. And my point there was you need to be circulating, doing the do now, or you need to be holding the kids to account. And I even suggested maybe with that class, just put one question on the board at a time. Let's do it on mini whiteboards, 3, 2, 1, show me, just so it's a bit more rapid, because these kids perhaps weren't at the stage where they could concentrate just yet for kind of 5-10 minutes independently. So we talked about different strategies, but it wasn't as quite well received. And again, it's probably on me for the way I delivered it, but it was that critical evidence. You can't argue against the critical evidence, right? And I think the difference between the two experiences was the first teacher when he saw that evidence, he was like, oh yeah, you know, you're right there, let's work on that. Whereas the other teacher may be a bit embarrassed by it or something, and you know, I don't know. But the point I'm trying to say there is, I really like the form a hypothesis. Let's gather some critical evidence, because that's going to form the bedrock of the conversation involved. I've got a few more things to say, but I just want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to reflect on any of that.
I think that you've done very similar to what I would have done. In the first scenario, I would have gone one step further, and I would have waited for the teacher to say something, and then gone to a kid who was writing and asked them what he said.
Yeah, it's good.
But there's a very good reason for that, and the reason for that is because it gives me the opportunity to say, you know, whether the teacher's name is Dave, I said, Dave, yeah, you said to the students, you know, make sure you carry the one. There's your maths generalization.
Nice.
Carry the one. Yeah, make sure you carry the one, right? Now, your subject knowledge is off the charts here. Yeah, your pedagogical content knowledge is absolutely right. Your sequencing is perfect. That aspect of thinking hard about this step and that step and giving them that guidance, golden. I wish every teacher did that. But they didn't hear it.
Exactly.
They didn't hear it. Yeah. And that also helps with your buy-in thing, because it makes it really clear that you're not having a go.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You're saying what you did is superb, but they didn't hear it.
Yeah.
And if they can't hear it, they're not going to benefit from the amazing stuff that you're saying.
Yes,
nice. And that allows you to couch it in that way. And then with your second guy, look, it's hard to know why they felt a bit more defensive about it. But again, I think it's normal and natural to feel defensive, and that's why I always talk in advance about the way it's going to feel. And I say that you might feel upset, and it's not my job. It doesn't make me happy when you feel upset, but in a sense, that's a good thing, because it tells me that you care.
Yeah.
And I say to people, sometimes I give people feedback and they just nod their head, yep. And I'm like, I just don't understand.
Yeah.
Right? How can you just nod your head and not be annoyed that something happened in your lesson that could have gone better, right? So when you start to feel that, right, just know that that's a good thing, because it tells me and it tells you that you care, but park it.
Yeah.
Park it.
Yeah.
Move it to the side. Deal with what's in front of us. And you know, I would say I have these conversations with complete strangers. People I've literally just met 3 seconds ago. And in nine times out of 10, it's absolutely fine. And in the 1 time out of 10, it takes a bit more time, but we get there in the end, right? And it's not in the spirit of compromise. I'm not compromising. Yeah. There's, you know, I listened in on a feedback conversation yesterday, actually, where these two were probably going at it, and it wasn't productive. And the person who was giving the feedback, who was like the mentor or whatever, was like, okay, well, let's compromise on this. And I'm like, what? I'm like, it's either X or Y. It's not, right? Like those kids in that class who hadn't done the do now, like there's no compromise. They hadn't done it. Yeah. So you can't be having that. You can't be having that. You can't leave until they realise that this is what happened, and that we can fix it. And sometimes it requires you to be very blunt. And again, you have to do it nicely. You have to do it professionally. You have to do it courteously. I was in a lesson recently with a teacher who, there was this kid at the front, again, we'll call him Craig, who the teacher gave the instructions, said, I want you to answer it in your books or whatever. Craig puts his hand up and goes, are we supposed to do it in our books or on the sheet? And Mrs. like, I said to you, do it in the books, right? And now, me in my head, right, I'm using the hypothesis model. I saw the teacher give the explanation. I don't think they were clear. I think she was giving out sheets while she was giving the explanation. There was loads of different steps. And I knew that there'd be loads of procedural questions, what I call procedural question. Where do I answer it? Do I do this first or this first? Do I use peel or not? That kind of stuff. And this kid, Craig, asked a question. She got annoyed. And obviously what I did is I then went round and I looked at if the other students were doing it in the right way. Like half of them were doing it in their books, half of them were doing it on the paper, half of them were doing it this way, half of them were doing it that way, all of that stuff. So I said to him, I said to him, look, you know, when you said that, so Craig said it's supposed to do it on the sheet or on the book. And this is what I don't understand, right? You said do it in your book. Why do you think he was asking? She was like, well, he's a difficult kid looking out the window. You know, he really struggles with attention. And I said, I don't think that's it. I think that when you gave the instructions, you did it like this, you were giving out the sheets at the time, blah, blah. I wrote down verbatim what she'd said, yada, yada, yada. And I think that's why he didn't hear it. And she was like, no, I don't agree. It's just, he's always like that. Everyone else is fine. I said, okay, look, do you remember when I said to you earlier that I am going to challenge you directly?
Yeah.
She was like, yeah, okay. This is what I mean when I said I'm going to challenge you directly. First thing, it wasn't just Craig, okay? I went to 6 or 7 other students. This one was doing it in their book. This one was doing it on the sheet. This one was using Peel. This one wasn't using Peel. This one was doing it like that. This one was doing it like that. Huge variation, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean the stuff they were writing was bad or wrong, but they weren't doing it exactly the right way you wanted, which tells me very clearly the instructions weren't delivered right. And I want to be really clear. That's point one. Point two is that even if Craig is one of those kids who finds it difficult to focus, looking out the window, how much more so you need to reach him, right? You can't just like write it off and be like, oh, well, that's okay. That's okay. I gave my instructions the way I did. He didn't get them because he's bad at paying attention. Like, that's not how this works, right? If you've got a student who you think is going to find it hard to pay attention or going to find it hard to follow the instructions, you need to work even harder to make sure they get it, right? And boy, did she find that difficult to hear. And just, and then eventually pulled it back, right? Because 99.9% of teachers want to do a good job. 99.9% of teachers want to do right by their kids. They want to maximize the time in the lesson. They want to be efficient. They want their kids to learn stuff. Yeah. So it's hard to hear. And trust me, I received the exact same type of feedback. And often publicly, right? The first thing I did as head of department when I joined the school is, in our very first department meeting, the first thing I did, I was brand new to the school, the pre-existing department, I videoed myself teaching, and the first meeting was the video of myself teaching and me then receiving feedback from the trainee.
Nice.
Who had been teaching for 3 weeks, right? Now, I want to show that it's not easy for me to take either, right? I'm here, I'm Mr. Big Shot, I'm the head of department, I'm taking trainee from feedback from someone who's been in the classroom 3 weeks. And it might be that we spoke about it before and I gave them some ideas of things to look for or whatever. But like the principle is that I really want to show people that it's hard for me as well, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
That's good. That's good. I've just got 2 quick questions on this kind of section of the observation process for you. So I've encountered this a couple of times, and I wonder if you have. What happens, and I find it dead annoying, what happens if you form a hypothesis, you test it, and it turns out it's not true? Like you think they've not understood that, so they've not been listening. You ask 3 kids, it turns out they have. You just ditch the hypothesis?
You'd be overjoyed. Right?
I am a bit. But a bit of me is annoying because I'm thinking that this is a really good, I've spotted something they can improve on, but I don't have the evidence. So I'm a bit annoyed.
Craig. That's your ego, Craig. You're wrong.
Okay.
Right? You're clearly not correct. Yeah, because it's worked. It's been fine. Right? And you should be grateful for that because every time, listen, Craig, every time I get a hypothesis correct, what it means is that a bunch of students haven't learned. Okay, let me flip this. You're making me sound bad here. Right, let me flip this. Let's use your example, right, from before, with the instructions about writing on the book, right? So let's imagine the teacher's been dishing out sheets and she said, make sure you write in the book. And you think, you know what, the kids haven't heard this. Now, there's no doubt it is going to be a better experience if the teacher makes those instructions really, really clear to the kids. But what happens if you just happen to ask 3 or 4? Wait, what's your evidence for saying there's no doubt?
Well, I'm using your use your kind of front-loading idea, right? Like
you've got the hype, but you're wrong, right? Because they did it.
Okay, so in that scenario, if you ask the 3 or 4 kids, you're happy to concede that it's not something the teacher needs to work on. That those instructions are fine to kind of keep giving in that way. You wouldn't bring it up.
Well, it depends.
Go on.
If it's like someone new who I've just met, I wouldn't bring it up.
Okay, no. Fine.
No. If it's, I observed a lesson this week with an expert MFL teacher, very, very, very strong practice. And towards the end of the lesson, he was doing some mini whiteboard work, and he was asking students to write some kind of verb or whatever it was. And I noticed a couple of students got it wrong and rubbed off their answer as soon as their boards went down. It's one of the things that I always look for. And what I think happens what I know happens a lot of the time is that if a student rubs off their answer as soon as the board goes down and they got it wrong, they often do not come away with clarity about whether they were right or wrong, right? Especially in something like MFL, where it can be quite complex and nuanced. So I always just go to them and I say, by the way, did you get the last one right? And they say, oh, yes, I did. Oh, great, thank you. And then I go to the teacher. Wait, this guy didn't have a clue, right? So in this case, I saw the student do it, and I did the same thing. And I went to them and I said, did you get the last one right? She goes, no, I got it wrong. And if it were a brand new teacher, someone I'd never met before, I wouldn't include it in feedback. Because I back myself to find something else. Right? I back myself to find something else, yeah? And I would have found something else. With this guy, I know him well. He's highly expert. And I said to him, look, this is what happened. I did test it, and she got it right? So in that moment, it was fine. But it's not a good habit to be in, to let them rub stuff off. And he's like, no, I completely agree. He's already completely bought in. There's no need to challenge him too hard on it. And he said, yeah, I completely agree. I said, okay, so talk me through how you're going to sort this. And he goes, I just need to keep remembering to say, don't rub your board off, put them down, that kind of stuff. And we have a few other strategies to deal with things like that as well. But with him, it's not a problem. With others, you know, if I've looked at, you know, I back myself across the course of 10 minutes to find half a dozen things that I could pick up on. Am I going to feedback all of those things? Obviously not. So I pick the ones that I think are A, highest impact, B, most likely to come up in another lesson, C, most likely to be heard, right? And a thing that I got wrong is least likely to be heard. Never underestimate the power of being right about this stuff. And also, it happens less and less now as time goes on as well, because the beauty of this model, it's called the hypothesis model, where you make a prediction about what will happen next, the hypothesis. The beauty of the model is that you get better at it with time. Because if the best thing to do, like I said, if you get a hypothesis wrong, the first thing is to be happy, because it means students are learning when you thought they wouldn't be learning, right? And that should cause joy to us all. But the second thing is to be happy, because it teaches you to make a better hypothesis next time. And it's good feedback for you. Like, okay, so why is it that it did work then? Well, then you might start to think cultural norms. Okay, so let's say, for example, the purple pen thing. So if a teacher says, get your purple pens out and start marking, I'm like, well, and then doesn't check. I'm like, well, obviously half the kids aren't going to do it. And then they all get them out. All of them. I'm like, that's a learning point for me. I then say in feedback, I say, I was really surprised because you didn't check, nothing like that, but you said, get your purple pens out. Why do you think it is that happened? And he said, well, I tell you the truth, but across many lessons, we spend a lot of time focusing on this. I've given detentions out to kids for not getting their purple pen out, and we're at the point now where they just do it. And I'm like, thank you. It's so good to hear that. That's really useful for me to know. Thank you. Humility is the name of the game here. There might be something you miss, something you don't know, something about the culture in this classroom that escapes you, because obviously by definition you're dipping in, you're dipping out. You come with your own biases. That's why the hypothesis model is strong, because it kills you as an ego, right? It completely removes you from the picture, right? It's just about what's the evidence, how can I help?
Okay, I'm going to take a long, hard look at myself after that, Adam. I think you're right there. I like that. You've also answered my second kind of follow-up question, which was, what do you do if you see a load of things that could be worked on? And just to reiterate what you said, Adam, you're looking for high. What was the kind of order? High impact.
I mean, it'll vary. 9 times out of 10, it's always ratio stuff. Sorry, that was a really bad way of putting it. 9 times out of 10, it's always ratio stuff. 9 times out of 10, it's ratio stuff. Okay, so about how you manage students' attention. Okay, in pretty much every lesson I ever go to. Are they using cold call, knocked out? Are they challenging students who aren't listening? That kind of stuff. So I tend to try and pick things that are, if you go to Bambrick Santoyo or some of the fancy instructional coaching books, they give more like specific guidelines and hierarchies, but broadly you're looking for things which are going to come up a lot. Okay, so if I observe a lesson where a teacher doesn't correct or challenge a misconception about whether or not colour of blood in veins is blue or red, I might give that as feedback, but like there's no way it's what I'm going to focus on, because it's not coming up again until next year, right? So I want something that's going to come up in their next lesson, right, and is going to come up often. I want something that is high impact, that I know is high impact, like cold call. I don't want to take a punt. Be like, well, I'm not really sure about the right way to solve this. Maybe you could try X, Y, or Z. You need to be able to give them something that this will work. It needs to be something that is reasonably based in some kind of evidence as well. It needs to be and easy to implement as well.
Perfect.
So for example, if I said to someone, yeah, you need to work on your kid's metacognition or whatever. Now, theoretically, metacognition, as far as the EF define it, could come up in any lesson. It's got evidence base, that kind of stuff. But like, I've got no idea how to actually do anything with it. So it's not going to be the feedback that I deliver ever.
Got it. Perfect. No, that's superb, Adam. Right. Well, I want to jump now then to this third stage, because I think I undervalue this stage. What do you do in between coming out of the lesson and kind of jumping into the feedback session? Do you have like a minimum time you want to leave there, or even a maximum time? What do you do in any time that you've got to kind of prep for this? What does that look like for you?
I tell you, I don't have a system. There's no hard and fast rule. Sometimes with what I call bread and butter stuff, I've seen someone for 10 minutes, they've not done cold call, or they should have used mini whiteboards, or they didn't front their demos participation, or the instructions weren't clear, or the kids were doing this or doing that or doing the other, or busy tricking, whatever it is. Yeah, there's not much prep that needs to be done. Yeah. There are other times where I need to think a bit more hard about it, either because the stuff I noticed was niche and needs more deconstruction, or because I think the person might need a bit more deconstruction.
Yeah.
And then in some cases, like I might try and prepare a sequence of order to talk about things, but I don't normally. To tell you the truth, maybe I should. If I had more time, I probably would. But I'm so frenetic. Like I go to these schools, like I'll literally see 25 lessons across the day. Like I'm running off my feet. I don't have time to do that kind of stuff.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I'll tell you one thing I forgot to ask you, Adam, as well. Just in terms of kind of practicalities of kind of taking notes and photos. I'm a big Evernote fan, and kind of type it up, take a photo. What are you doing? Are you doing it on your phone or on an iPad or pen and paper?
Yeah, I just type on a laptop.
Oh, on a laptop, okay. You set it up at the back, wander around the room, keep going to the back to kind of make notes.
Yeah, and I'll take photos if I need to. The typing is better than writing, because it's faster.
Yeah.
And it means you can actually sometimes get down full things verbatim. I'll write stuff down like, will this be revisited? Or will this give us problems further down the line? And then later, if it does, I'll go back to that point and write something like that. I did when I was first starting, I had like a table where I would write what I saw happened, my hypothesis, and how I tested it.
Yeah.
But I don't need to do that anymore because I've done it for long enough. But it's not something I wouldn't recommend.
Got it. This is brilliant.